Hello everyone, looks like I'm live. My son's PCA is just showing up, so she's coming in the door right now. Apologies. Hey, what's going on? You're on YouTube.
Hey!
So welcome everyone. I hope you're all doing okay. I'm a little bit of a hot mess today, so apologies if I seem scattered. It's just been one of those days where nothing quite goes the way you hope. But I hope you all are having fun working on this project. I've been having fun. If you haven't seen any of my photos I've been posting photos of my progress on Facebook and Instagram on my own smartphone case, and though I haven't had nearly as much time as I would like to work on it just because of the circumstances, I'm going to show you what I've got done today and hopefully work on it a little bit more with you today and answer questions. Show you another couple bead embroidery techniques that I'd like to show you, and we'll keep going with this Bead With Me smartphone case project. Hi everybody. I'm going to start saying hi to people. Hi Vicky, hi Jan, hi Mimi, hi Babette, hi Geraldine, hi Dana, hi Linda, hi Nancy, hi Sue, hi Jill, hi Lynn. Did I ever say hi Vanessa? Hi Vanessa. Hi Dessa. Yes, doing good. Good. Thanks, Jill, for saying you'll take me any way I am. I appreciate the acceptance. All right, so I'm going to switch over to the picture here so you can see this is my current progress on my smartphone case. And last night I just ended up working on this little section up here, making some decisions about what to do next. I decided to finally incorporate my 8/0s with the anchor beads. That's a technique I showed in the previous video. And I'll show you what it looks like with the phone on it. Or sorry, with it on the phone, rather. I would have liked to make this circle a little bit bigger. A word of advice if you're going to be cutting out circles around dongles or any other holes on your case, make them bigger than you think you need them, because what I found when I added my beads around the inside of the circle is that the beads are kind of almost overlapping the cut a little bit and made the hole a little bit smaller, so it's a little harder to get the dongle thing, the ring, out than I hoped, and it's a little harder to get it back in. So that's a problem with this particular case I'm going to have to live with, but in the future, I just wanted to give you that heads up. Cut your holes large, a little bit larger than you think you're going to need them. Okay. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with the design at this point. I have ripped it out several times, so just know if you end up doing that, like trying something and you don't like the way it looks, rip it out. That's part of the process. If you don't rip it out and just try to live with something you're not quite happy with, you're never going to be satisfied with it. So don't be afraid to do the frog stitch, as they say in the beading world. Alright, so the first thing I wanted to show today is based on a question Nancy Dale posted about bugle beads. She wanted to know how I made these little arrays of bugle beads that sort of fan out along these arcs of seed beads. So I just wanted to demonstrate that technique first. And then if anybody has questions as I'm going along or other techniques that you'd like me to show you today, please just post in the chat and I'll be happy to show you those. Alright, so I should have started this closer to where I was going to add the bugle beads, but I started a thread here. I'm going to work my way over to these this arc of pearls here and show you the bugle bead addition, using those as like the sort of the base. So what I would do is take a bugle bead, put it down, see about how far out it goes from the beads that you're going to be putting them next to, and then try to sort of draw an arc along about that distance away from the pearls or the beads that you're going to be putting them up against. And that'll sort of be your guide for spacing them out. If you can't draw on your non-woven stitching base because it's black or dark, you don't have to do this step, but this is just something I do sometimes that kind of helps me because spacing these can be a little bit tricky. The thing is, you're going to want to have them closer together when they're, you want to have the ends of them that are sitting up against the row of beads you're putting them against. That side of the bugles have to be closer together than the other side, because this curve here is shorter than this curve, so this curve here, you need to have a little more distance between the beads on the outside. Alright, so I'm going to place the first one down here. This is a technique where you definitely want to place the bead down on the non-woven stitching base and then stitch down through the bead, just to make sure that the bugle is going to lie exactly where you want it to. Now you do want to do another pass through this, at least one more pass through this, because the edges of the bugle beads can be a little bit sharp. Alright, but I'm not going to do that for the demonstration. I'm just going to stitch up next to the bugle bead about what I think is about half the bead's width away from the first, because I want these bottom parts of the bugles to be right up against each other. I'm going to pick up another bugle and I'm going to stitch down a little bit more than half a bead's width away from the first one. Alright, so I'm okay with that. I'm happy with the way that sits. And for the next one, you come up next to that second bugle bead, pick up a new bugle bead, and stitch down a little bit more than half a bead's width away. So I'm trying to basically follow the arc of the pearls, and again have the space between the outside edges of the bugle beads be a little more than the spacing between these bottom parts of them. It can be tricky, and this is one of those techniques you may have to try a couple times before you get it to look exactly how you want it to. That's okay. Sometimes beading is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That one's a little splayed more than the last couple, but another thing I do with these is sometimes I'll wait to do my second pass of thread through until I've got them all placed down. Do I think double thread works? Yes, Tessa, you can definitely use double thread. I would still go through a second time, even if you're using doubled thread. I was actually using doubled thread on a lot of my bead embroidery on this project that I've been working on, just in general, because it's a good idea. You can always make second passes through beads, but doubled thread helps even more. Alright, so now I've got this arc of bugle beads. I'm pretty happy with the spacing. I think I want to change the spacing just a little bit with this one and with this one here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back through these a second time. When I go back through them a second time, I can kind of influence where they're sitting by stitching a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right of the hole that I'm going to pass through on the bead. If I stitch a little bit to the left of the hole that I'm going to pass through, it's going to pull that bead a little bit slightly left when I stitch through it. You don't want to do it more than a millimeter, half a millimeter to a millimeter, because if you're pulling on the edge of the bugle bead with the thread really hard, like I said, the bugle beads can be sharp and it can cut the thread. But if you just have it pull a little bit, you can kind of adjust where the bugle bead sits. And I'm going to do the same to this one, the next one here. Stitching a little bit to the left of that bugle bead because I want that side to go a little more like that. So I'm going to stitch through, oops, and then stitch down sort of right in the middle on that end of it. And when I pull, see it pulled it a little bit more to the left. I like that position a little bit better for that one. And I'm just doing it very, very slightly on this one here. And then even more slightly on this next one. But I think I actually want to pull this bottom edge a little bit to the left on this one, so it's more like that. So I'm going to stitch a little bit to the left of that hole that I just came out of. Whoops, I lost my needle came off my thread. See when I pull the thread how it moves a little bit? Okay, so I like the position of those. So that's basically all there is to it, to laying down the bugle beads in sort of an arc fashion. Does anyone else have any other questions about any of the techniques you saw on this case that I didn't get a chance to show you? If not, I'll continue working on my own smartphone case. Oh, hi Sharon. Nice to see you. I was at a decision-making point last night. The ones you're meaning are closer to the cab and the triangle. Oh, I'm sorry, Nancy. I totally blew that question. So I see that you were talking about these guys. Okay, I can show you how I did that. Let me move this guy aside now and go back to my little sketch. My little bead sketch that I had been working on. Needle up my thread again. Let me move over a little bit so I can show you that technique. So with that technique, actually similar, I'm going to put down a line of beads along these bugles because I have them going around some beads that are circling the rose pendant, which I used sort of like a cabochon. So I'm going to lay these down here. Sorry, my bead mat's a total mess, if you could see. By the time I get really like this many hours into a project, it just all goes to heck and beads go everywhere, and I'm perfectly fine working like that. Alright, so what I did there was I took a size 11 seed bead and stitched it down right up next to the line of beads. That was like the previous row. Okay, like that. And then you're not a pain, Nancy, don't worry. And then I stitched the two bugle beads next to the bead so that they sort of form a triangular shape over the bead I just stitched down. So like that. It's a good idea to bring the bugle bead down and kind of see where you're going to have to put it. And I think the bugle beads I had on the smartphone case were a little bit smaller even than these. I haven't used bugle beads in a while, so I can't remember how they were sized, but these ones on the case are a little bit smaller than the ones I'm using right now. But you could really do it. You could do it with any size bugle bead. What you'll need to adjust is the size of the seed bead that you're putting them around. And then I'm just checking. What I also did then was to put a size 11 seed bead up here, like a little point. Me too, it looks like my typical mat. Oh, I'm glad to hear that, Sharon. I'm not the only one. I have my spurts where I clean things up and get organized, and then when I'm working on something and really focused, I tend to just let it all go to heck and get super messy. And then at some point, I just clean it all up at once. Alright, so that's the technique I think you were asking about, Nancy, is creating those little triangles. And I wouldn't totally be happy with the shape of this triangle. I would like it to be more symmetrical. So if I were keeping this, I would go back and either go through this bugle again and make it turn a little bit that way, or make this one turn a little bit that way, so that if I'm looking down the center of the triangle, these bugles are sort of angled exactly the same from the center out. You're welcome. Alright, so let me talk about where I am with my case. This baby is still not sleeping. I put her down for a nap over a half hour ago, and she's just playing in her crib. I don't understand it, but she's quiet, so that's good. At least I can still do the class. She's crazy. Okay, so I was at a decision point yesterday, and what I mean by that is that I have these two sort of major sections going on. I have this circular section kind of building outwards, and then this circular section building outwards, and they joined up obviously at the top of the this section here. It worked out really nicely so that one of these Moby duos just made it to the edge of this cutout circle that I had. So that's a nice place to have them sort of overlap. But I had to make a decision about what to do where the beadwork from this larger circle starts meeting up with the beadwork on the outside edge of this this circular section. And I had just decided before I stopped that I was going to do a row of these matte 11 seed beads, the matte bluey gray ones, along the outside edge of this circular portion, and then I'm going to be done adding to this until I do more on the edges of this sort of side portion that's coming out from my larger circular section of beading. So that's where I was with that, just continuing to work on outlining these pearls. So do a little bit of that. The other reason why I had to sort of start making decisions like that is I wanted to figure out what to do, how far to go with this circle to keep going. Is there a preferred place to start, Linda? Can you start in a corner and work up? Yeah, you can definitely start in a corner and work up. There's really no right or wrong answer to that. The thing is, if you're going to have focal beads, like cabochons or rivolis or, you know, some kind of larger bead that's much larger than the other beads you're using, I would start there and sort of work out from that. And if you're going to have several of those, I would put those down first and then do a few rows working outward on each one of those so that you have a few rows on one, a few rows on the next one, and kind of each are growing at sort of the same pace, because you're going to have to make decisions about what happens where the designs that are growing outward from those focals are going to meet up. So it's sort of like what I was just talking about here with my decision making, when you have two separate areas or more than two separate areas of like a focal that you're building out from, you have to decide what happens where they meet. That's very important. One good way to treat that is to have like dead space between them where you have rows of beads that are the same. That's sort of an easy way just to kind of fill in and have it be boring areas that the eye can rest. Another way is to plan the focals so that there's going to be certain design elements between them that meet up right at a specific spot. What I was just saying about having the focals building out from several areas, if you are thinking you want to have a design element that stops abruptly at the next focal, then you would want to work just from one focal outward till you get to that point where you want the next focal to meet up, if you want a focal to meet up at a specific spot from your first focal. So I hope that answers your question, Linda. Now, where I was here, I was making these little arcs of beads over the pearls. When you're doing this, the decision you have to make about this is how many beads to add at one time. And I was finding that 2 or 3 beads at a time was a good number to sort of work my way over these. These are size 3mm Swarovski pearls and size 11 seed beads. My goal is to sort of make an arc over the bead and have it end just as I'm getting to the next bead. And that sort of allows the beads to follow the shape of the circular pearls. So I think I have room for 2 more in there. Okay. So they sort of, it's a little bumpy, it sort of follows the edge. That's going to be sort of my, I think my termination for this little focal pair, focal area. Apologies. As I said, I'm a hot mess today, so can't always remember the words that I'm supposed to say. All right. Oh, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was adding bead woven components. Someone had asked a question. I think it was Lisa Vale. She asked a question about adding like bezeled rivolis or bezeled stones. And what you want to do is bezel them first. If it's, you know, you want to do an off-loom bezel, I find this to be the best way. Of course, you can bezel on the bead embroidery, but I like to do the bezel first. I've got one here I'm going to use. And then use one of the hanging threads on the bezel to then stitch it down to the bead embroidery. So I've got this bezeled Rivoli. I think it's a size 10mm. It's either 10 or 12. I didn't actually measure it. I don't really care exactly what the size is, but I thought it would be a nice design element to put opposite this hole, because it's sort of a, you know, it's this similar shape. It's a circular shape. But this is sort of a positive because it's something there, and this is sort of a negative because it's a hole. And I just thought it would be nice. And what I have to do is when I start working the extra rows that I've created, off of the purl row that's now on the outside edge down here. I have to figure out what's going to happen between those pearls and the Rivoli. So I was actually going to work my way, keep working this outside edge up with these additional rows that I've added, and see if I can get it to a point where it looks, the beads that are right next to the pearls look nice right next to the Rivoli, the Rivoli bezel. So that's the next thing I have to do, the next bit of work. And then after that, I'll have to go with this pattern I created up here in this section, in these areas here, at least these 4 areas, and work outward. And then I think I'm going to end up having some of that dead space that I was talking about, where it's just boring rows of like the same bead over and over, here and then up here, because I don't really have any space that's not super busy right now. And I like the contrast of having areas that are super busy and then having areas that are kind of boring to look at, because it creates an interesting composition, and then the whole thing isn't completely busy. The whole thing could be completely busy and it could look super cool. I just haven't tried that yet, and just kind of I'm sticking to what I know. Lisa says, pretty Rivoli and Delicas around it. What color are they? So the Rivoli, let's see. The Rivoli is light sapphire frost. Oh, and it's 12 millimeter. Ha! The bag is labeled. Look what kind of information you can glean when you actually read. I didn't even read. So this is another E.H. Ashley creation. The baby's calling out. They create these frosted effects on some of their Swarovski stones, and it's pretty cool. It makes them look like they're kind of glowing. I thought that was a nice effect to use with my color choices, my color palette, and the beads I'm using, because it's a little bit of a softer look. And this, I think, overall has a bit of a soft look to it. The Delicas are somewhere on my messy workstation. Sorry, I'm just looking. I think they're under my computer. My apologies. This is not great YouTubing, I know, but I want to be sure to answer your questions. So if I can get my computer sitting back on here. Okay. These Delicas, they must be from a Bead and Button show shopping spree that I went on from Beyond Beadery. They are Delica 1457. So they're sort of a pink silver-lined alabaster color. And it's very pale. I was looking for something sort of coppery, but I couldn't find anything that wasn't just straight up galvanized copper Delicas, and galvanized that aren't coated with Duracoat or a permanent finish, just where the color wears off pretty quickly, so I didn't want to use those. But I think it goes well enough with the copper in my piece and the other colors I have going on. Please show the back side. Okay, so the back side right now is unfinished. It's going to be leather on the back. I'm going to glue a piece of leather on, but right now this is what it looks like. Just lots of threads, and the threads are gray, and the non-woven is dyed gray, so not a lot of contrast going on there, but I think you can see the threads. That's gonna be all covered up, as I said, with this cool piece of leather I got from Bugle bead store. Okay, so what I'm going to end up doing is putting glue all over this, and then putting the leather down, and then cutting the leather everywhere that I see leather that is in these holes or whatever. I'm going to cut it, try to cut it with those holes. I might use an X-Acto knife and put it on a piece of wood and sort of cut very carefully along the leather that way, because it's going to be pretty hard to get scissors in there with the beads all in place now without, angling it and cutting thread or whatever. And then I'll cut along the outside edge of the non-woven and the leather. I'm not going to cut the non-woven first because I want to spread glue beyond the edge of where my threads all stop. And then when it adheres to the leather, I know that I'm going to have glue right up to the edge of my beadwork. And that's easier for me to do if I leave this intact and don't trim away the excess non-woven first. Okay, let's see, more stuff from my shop for sale. Not quite yet, Lisa. I'm not ready to list more stuff now. That made life a little extra complicated for a couple weeks, so I'm going to be not having stuff on my shop until I think my next kit with that Purple Haze Swarovski crystal. So that'll be in a couple weeks. After I finish my smartphone case, I'll work on that guy. Hi Linda, your laptop went crazy, I'm sorry. Welcome. How did I fix my stitching on the Rivoli? I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but this is the bezel is an off-loom peyote stitch bezel. It's like one drop peyote stitch done in the round where you have to do a step up. You use an even number of beads. I believe I used 30. I want to say 30 beads for this. 30 delicas, and then on the back I did two rows of 15-0s after the 11-0 delicas. On the front I just did one row of 15-0s after the 11-0 delicas, and that was able to close it up enough to hold the Rivoli in place. Then I added a row of 2mm pearls along the outside edge. Oh, and there are four total rows of delicas. So this is a technique that is very commonly used by lots of different beading designers and students alike, and there are a lot of YouTube tutorials about this technique. So if you want to know how to do that, you don't know how to do that, try searching for bead weaving Rivoli bezel on YouTube. What I'm going to do to attach it to the non-woven stitching base, in case that's what you were asking, is I'm going to take one of these threads, I'm going to stitch it down. I'm going to stitch right from where it's coming out in the bezel, as long as it's coming out sort of the back side of the bezel. I'm going to stitch right down into the non-woven stitching base, and then I'm going to stitch up in another spot, like over here. Try to catch a bead, sort of on the back side. I'll be looking like this to try to find a bead on the back side and stitch through it. Then stitch back down through the non-woven stitching base, stitch up in a different spot, catch a bead if I can, or just catch a thread in the bezel if you can't catch a bead. Stitch back down through, and just keep repeating that process until I've attached it at least 5 or 6 places at least. You know, you want to have an ample enough number of places attached all the way around so that it can't pull away from the non-woven at any point if you move it around. Alright, so let's see. Will I do any more stitching on the inside of the circle to bind the backing to the foundation? No. If I had been able to calculate it better, surely I may have left enough room in this cutout circle to add a brick stitch edge row of beads on the inside circle. That would have been a really nice finish. But since you can't see the non-woven stitching base at all from you know, the outside of the case, you can't see that edge, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to leave it as is. Describe the leather I'm using. So this is a patterned colored leather. It's done with a sort of, I guess this is like an alligator skin pattern. I don't believe it's actually alligator skin. I'm pretty sure it's cowhide or something like that, but it's from Bijou Bead Store. If you have questions about it that I can't answer, like more specifically what it is, where it comes from, I'm not sure if they have any right now, but you can always send your questions to these guys. And Stephanie, if you're on here and you don't want these questions, I apologize in advance. Probably should have asked you, but yeah, any questions about it, contact these guys. If they don't have it, other people online probably do, so you can do some searching for that. I'm super good at explaining things. Aw, thanks, Nancy. Joining my broadcast now. Hi, Hilly. Thank you for joining, even though you're a little bit late. It's okay. I started late, too, because today is just not gone how I would have liked it to. My baby is still not sleeping. She's rocking in her crib. I don't understand. She never skips naps. This is very unusual. Does anyone else have any questions about the bead embroidery? If you don't, I'm just going to keep working, and I'm probably going to take one of these threads and start working on this problem area that I have down here where I have to make a decision about what to do in the space between the Rivoli bezel and the beads that are there. Ideally, I'd like it to be about here, as long as it works out with the seed beads, but I don't want to attach it yet because I don't know exactly where the beads that I'm going to put here are going to fall next to this, and I want to make sure when I do attach it that it's right up next to whatever beads I add here. I don't want any space. So I'm going to put the beads there that I know I have to put there so that I can figure out this problem. They're having a leather reveal sale tomorrow on their new shipment of leather. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Thanks, Sharon. So if anyone didn't see that in the chat or isn't joining the chat right now, if you're not able to see it, Sharon, who lives in Georgia, goes to Bijou Bead Store, just shared with me that Bijou Bead Store is having a sale tomorrow on their leather. So the piece of leather I just showed you, that came from Bijou Bead Store. So check them out on their website. I'll put this up again while I'm threading my needle. It's bijou.com. Write down how to spell it if you think you might forget. It's a little tricky. It's hard for me to even remember what they're called the first few times I talked to them. But bijou. Like the French word bijou, which means bead or bauble, but with bead in it. Oh, hi Kathleen. Thank you. I'm glad you like my case. Oh, it's on Saturday. Okay, so that sale is going on Saturday, not Friday, but go to their website and check out the details if you want to snag some of that snazzy leather. They get really cool patterns and designs and colors. I had never seen a piece of leather like that before, and I just thought that was really neat. Stephanie may have even given it to me because she's a sweetheart. Can't remember. But that seems like something she would do. Alright, so the way I started this next row up here is I started by surrounding the bicones and this 11-0 seed bead between them here with these purple beads. So I would do 2 peaks, 2 of these, and then add the magatamas here between them. Then add these anchored O beads, and then these 4mm Swarovski rounds. So I'm going to do it in the same order as up there. Oh, thanks for spelling it, Shirley. It'll be on their Facebook page too. Oh, great. Thank you. That's good to know. I'm going to go check that out too because I have some more bead embroidery projects I would like to do. Alright, so the way I did these peaks here is I added 4 of my purple beads at a time. And just from having done it a couple times where I bring the beads down to the end of the thread, I determined that if I add 4, they fall right about up to this point, just to the side of this size 11, the blue bead. And then what I do so that they kind of follow the curve of the bicone shape next to the seed bead is I'm stitching up between the second and third bead, but also right up next to the bicone, and then stitching through the third and fourth bead in that group of 4. And that kind of pulls in that point between the second and third bead. So now this line is kind of curved to fit the shape of these beads, how they curve. Then I'm going to add my second group of 4, just with my thread coming out of that 4th bead, and stitch down right next to the bicone into that pearl. And I'm going to do the same thing where I bring my thread up between the second and third bead. My baby is still not sleeping. I don't understand. And then I'm going to stitch this way because the next thing I'm going to do is add the single bead at the top of the peak. So that sort of pulls them so they follow the shape there. And I'm going to add the single bead between these by picking up a bead and stitching through this next group of beads. I'm just going to go through all 4 of them. Why not? A little passive thread will only help. And then stitch down Oops. If you haven't noticed, I'm using doubled thread right now. I just decided I wanted to do that rather than reinforcing every row that I do. Now I stitched up right next to that single bead. I'm stitching through it, and I'm stitching down through the non-woven beading base right after I come out of the hole. And the reason I'm doing that is because that bead was not attached by itself to the non-woven base before this. It was attached only to the beads on either side, and that means it still could potentially come up away from the base. And I want to make sure that it's just held securely down to that base, so it needs to have a thread coming from either side of it and going into the base. And I've just created a little knot. If you do decide to use doubled thread, don't make it too long. Try to stretch it before you put it on your needle. Use thread conditioner. Do all the things that help to keep thread from tangling, because when you double it, what's happening is that the way it was woven around the bobbin on one side, it's going to be opposite the other side because of how it's folded in half. And that tends to make it tangle a lot easier than using single thread. Are you going to use glue? To be sure, because I saw one of the triangle beads pop up in one picture. Oh yeah, so that was when I took the picture when I had placed it down like this. And what I had done was I popped up my ring, and then I realized how hard it was to pop it down. When I tried to pop it down, one of these triangle beads got caught, kind of like this, what's happening right there. So I realized that when I'm using this case, I'm not going to be able to put that ring all the way down unless I take it out of the case and kind of really manipulate the beads, or go back around and kind of try to stitch these further away from the edge. So I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do about that right now, but I don't plan on using glue with them. But you are more than welcome to use glue if you use beads like that. There's no reason not to. Alright, so now that I've got that single bead at the peak stitched down, I'm going to work my way over to this next set of bicones over here. Oops, and do the same thing. And this thread really wants to tangle. I probably didn't stretch it enough when I added it. Do you always sew a double thread? No, I don't always sew with double thread. I just decided to in this instance because I decided with, I'm usually doing this with like at least one person actually hanging off my body or sitting on my lap, and my time is even more strained than it usually is. So I just decided in this case I didn't want to have to reinforce every row that I did with the seed beads. So using doubled thread, I'm confident that adding the seed beads, I'm not going through them a second time, and I think that that's going to be okay. They're going to hold well. I have a friend who just arrived for a surprise visit in my driveway, and he doesn't know I'm doing a class. I'll be right back. I'm just going to tell him what's going on. Hey, I'm doing it on my phone. Oh boy. I'm back. I just, my light fell over and my computer slid off the thing. Okay, I'm back. I just had to tell him what was going on when I was doing class and couldn't chat. We have these friends that stop by every now and then just to chat from the driveway. It's pretty nice. We don't get to see them for dinner anymore at the moment, so it's nice to at least see their faces in person. Well, that's just what he was doing. Alright, so working on the second peak here. Just going to do it quickly since I explained what I was doing for the first one. I want to get to the next part where I'm adding the magatamas between the two peaks. Here's my second peek. I just have to stitch down that middle bead so that it is anchored to the non-woven itself. Okay, so I've got my 2 peaks. In between these, I added a set of 3 magatamas. I was talking about these beads last time. They're kind of like a little bit pinched on one side, and magatama in Japanese actually means pinch bead. So I'm adding 2 to start, stitching from this space next to the purple beads I just added, right up next to the purple beads on the other side. I'm going to stitch up in the first spot again, stitch through the first magatama. Oops. Pick up a third magatama, and I picked it up the same way as the other 2. There's copper on one side. I wanted to change it up though, so I turned it around. And I'm stitching through the second magatama, and then down through the non-woven stitching base. So this makes a nice little triangular configuration without too much extra work. Adding that third one last. Okay, so now let's see where the Rivoli is going to fall if I have it right there. Oh, I kind of like that. If I fit the magatama right in between those 2 pearls. And then I have a little bit of space here. And I'm going to have to add something, a little bit of space there. I'm going to have to add something, but that looks nice to me. And it must be 30 beads because there's an odd number of pairs. And I could tell that because there's a space here, and directly opposite that space there's an embellishment bead. Alright, so I'm going to put down this needle. I'm going to get out another needle and show you the attachment of the Rivoli bezel to the non-woven base. I apologize, I should have had more needles out to begin with. You appreciate seeing how I problem solve? Oh, cool. Thanks, Shirley. That makes me feel better about basically having no plan today for what I was going to do. I mean, I figured I'd, figure it out because I'm basically talking about what I'm doing with this case that I'm working on. But, yeah, thank you for saying that. I love how my colors work together. Thank you very much. Mango Kayak Girl. I love that. Alright, so I see that this thread, this was my tail thread that I've just needled up. It's on the front side of my bezel, so I'm going to weave it through to the back side. So then when I stitch down into the bead embroidery base, I'm attaching to the back side of the beads. I wonder if this baby's talking. Oh yeah, she is. I wonder, can you guys hear that? She's just sick of being stuck in her bed, not sleeping. I really don't understand why she's not sleeping though. She is getting a million teeth, so it could be that. I might cut this just a couple minutes short and go get her at some point because I really don't want to leave her in there that long if she's not sleeping. I hope you all can understand. I'll bring her to come say hi though. She's getting really loud. Oh, you know what? I have to anchor this magatama to the base. I totally forgot about that. I realized that I forgot that when I could just move it around. I was trying to place the Rivoli up next to it. So I have to stitch up next to it, stitch through it. Oh, there's cat hair. I am not a fan of my cat. He's like a reluctant pet, and he loves to sit on my bead mat, and it's just like, dude, you're just making it worse for yourself. Okay. Alright, now that magatama is anchored down, I think Adelia is coming to ask me a question. So you might get to see her too. Alright, so I'm going to have this anchored here. I'm going to kind of hold it in place while I do this, because otherwise I'm afraid that it's going to not be exactly where I want it. So I'm coming up over here. I don't think I'm going to be able to catch a bead. I'm going to have to catch a thread. So I've just stitched up through the bezel itself. And I'm going to see if I can kind of stitch down in a slightly different position so I can catch thread as I go back down. And it looks like I have, because I can see the thread is still connected to the bezel as I pull. It's not coming loose. So I've caught a thread. I'm going to stitch up down here now. Do the same thing. I've just stitched up through the bezel. I'm going to see if I can catch a thread. Go back down. Yep, I did. Cool. Okay, and I'm checking to make sure it's centered. It looks centered between the left and the right sides of the case. I'm going to turn this, and same thing over here. Yep, got that anchored. And I'm making sure it's not pulling the bezel too much either. Sometimes if you pull too hard with this technique, you can kind of make the delica's gonna go out of position a little bit. So sometimes stitching a little easier is better. Thank you for showing us how to do the triangle. You're welcome, Emily. Why don't you start directly under the magatama? I guess I could have. I didn't really think about that. I just kind of thought if I held it in place, I could make sure it stays in the right spot, but that's a good idea. Start right under the point you want, you know where you want that point to be. All right, so I'm just coming around now to the magatama. And I think I might actually do something a little funky. I might go through the beads to the left and the right of the magatama and go through the magatama. Let's see how that looks when I do that. Some of this is like a little bit of experimentation, just to kind of pull them together, make sure they stay put. Okay, yeah, I think that worked. I like that. So I'm going to stitch down now into the base, and I'm going to be done with this thread because it's getting really short, so I'm going to secure it just by stitching back and forth through the base a few times. And I don't feel I have quite enough connections yet between the Rivoli bezel and the base, so what I'll do is I'll needle up the working thread here and use that to do a few more connections between the bezel and the base. Alright, so I'm going to go get this sleepless baby. Oh wait, did she go to sleep? She might have actually just went to sleep. Okay, yep, I take it back. I'm not getting the baby. I think she just actually fell asleep. I don't know why it took her so long, but I'd rather have her sleep than be super grumpy. It says that, does anyone have any other questions for me? We are going to have a question and answer session at that'll be the 5th part of this project series. Next Thursday, which is the 21st, something like that, May 21st. I'm going to, my goal is to have the bead embroidery all done, have my leather glued down to the back, as I explained, like spreading glue on the back, gluing the leather down, and then trimming all around the edge. That needs to all be done before starting the peyote stitch bezel that comes off of the bead embroidery and leather base. So next week we'll be actually showing you how to start this bead embroidery bezel and work it a little bit. Do I tie a knot or just go up and down a few times? Nancy is asking. I just go up and down a few times. And the reason for that is if you go up and down enough times, it's sort of like forming its own kind of knot within the non-woven stitching base. It's not like an overhand knot or whatever with the thread, but it's going to be secure enough. There's going to be enough friction between those parts that it's not going to come loose. The other thing too is that every piece of thread that ends up on the back is going to end up covered in glue. So all of those threads will be held in place even more once you spread glue on the back and spread the leather. So it becomes even more secure once you spread glue on the back and let that dry. I need to make sure I don't get my threads mixed up here. I have about 4 hanging threads off this piece right now. How will you decide the shapes of the boring areas to fill in? Well, I already have a bead in mind for that. I have this triangle that has a little bit of a copper color on one side, and I really thought that would look nice because in the areas where it's clear, it'll pick up the gray from the background. It's just sort of one of my colors in this. And in the areas where it has the copper, it'll pick up the copper from the rest of the piece, and it'll provide like an area where there is some variegation or variation in the finish that's a little bit random. I like to throw a little bit of randomness in where I can. I'll decide the shape based on the beads in the rows that are before this. So it'll probably just end up being arcs like this, like it'll follow the shape of the beads as it did in this phone case. I just followed the shape of the lines of beads before it. So yeah, I'm usually just building arcs of beads around other beads. That's kind of how it goes with this sort of designing. Regular brick stitch along the edge. Yes, surely. I plan on doing a regular brick stitch edging along the edge of the phone case after I glue the backing on and let that dry and trim it. And I may or may not end up embellishing it with picos as I did on this case. I'll have to wait and see how it looks with just the brick stitch edging. Would you ever attach the Rivolis by stitching through one of the 2mm pearls, adding a bead and stitching down through all around? Yeah, totally. You could totally do that. I'm sure there's many different techniques that you can use to attach the Rivoli. All you have to do is just make sure that you have several stitches between the bezel beads and the non-woven stitching base. So however you're able to accomplish that is totally fine. Can I explain transfer paper? I'm not sure exactly what that means. I don't use transfer paper. I don't really know what that is. Is that a paper that has the that carbon stuff in it? I'm not sure how to answer that question. Do I always use leather on the back, or can you use another fabric such as something? You can use other fabrics. You can use ultra suede. I would use something that's not woven, which means that it's not made from threads that are, woven into each other like this. Because you have to think about what's going to happen when you cut the edges. If you cut the edges of a woven fabric, the fibers tend to start fraying unless you're using fray check or some other product or glue to kind of, you could glue along the edges on the front side, what'll be the front side of the fabric. You could add some glue along the edges so that the fibers don't fray. I haven't personally tried that because I'm comfortable using the non-woven materials to back my beadwork. But there are other non-woven fabrics or coverings you can use. There's this stuff called cork fabric, which I'm not sure if it has a woven fabric underneath the cork, but then there's a thin layer of cork, and it's sort of bonded in a way that you can cut it, and there's no fraying, I don't think. Ultra suede, like I said, is a good one. There's a different name for ultra suede. I forget what the story is. It's made in Japan. There's a different word for it. It was originally designed for the interiors of cars, of automobiles, to use as a replacement for leather. And you can buy that in large bolts, but I'm not sure how commercially or available that is for retail purchasing in smaller quantities. So if you stick to leather or ultra suede, which are readily available in the beading community, I know you'll be good. Any experimentation with other fabrics, I think that's awesome if you want to try with other things. But for me, I like to stick to the non-woven stuff that I can easily get. Your pattern says you use transfer paper. I wonder what I meant by that, because I wrote that several years ago. I'm trying to rack my brain. I apologize if I'm having a moment where I can't remember offhand what I had used when I designed that smartphone case way back in the day. That was 2 babies ago, so a lot of my brain has died since then, and I honestly cannot remember at this moment. You know what? If I remember, if I end up remembering, Linda, what that is, I'll message you, and I'm going to try to think back. I'm going to go look back at my pattern and see if there's any other indications as to what I may have meant by that. Will I demo the brick stitching? I definitely can, Shirley. If I get to that point where I've finished most of the brick stitch edging by next week, I'll leave a little bit undone so I can demo it. It may be that I'm not going to have enough time to even do it beforehand, and then I'll definitely be able to show you the start and everything. Microfiber, yeah, that might be it, Tanya. It has like another brand name too, though. But microfiber is another one that's not woven, I believe. You're laughing at me, Lynn? Hey, we all have these moments, okay? I did also, yes, Nancy, thank you. I did also demonstrate the brick stitch edging in another video. I think it was the Wild Geranium Necklace project. That was my first Bead with Me online YouTube class. So check back in my YouTube feed for that, and I think I definitely must have showed it in there because I showed all the parts of that project. What was your reasoning besides bezeling the Rivoli before adding it to the piece rather than bezeling on the foundation? My reasoning, Shirley, was just having experienced what my bezels are like coming right off of a bead embroidery base versus having the bezel done before I put it on there, especially with a pointed back stone. If this were a flat back stone, I'd be more comfortable gluing the stone down first and then creating a row of back-stitched beads around it and then building up the peyote stitch bezel off of that back-stitched row of beads. But with a pointed stone, what happens is that the point is sitting against the base, and if you don't use beads or another piece of non-woven beading material that you've fashioned into like a donut shape or something underneath the Rivoli to support it from wobbling side to side, for me, I've found it's really hard to get a perfectly circular backstitched row of beads around it in order to start the bezel off of it. So I've found that my bezels, when I do that, especially with Rivolis or other pointed back stones, end up being a little bit oblong or not perfectly circular. And doing the off-loom bead woven bezel, it's following the natural edge of the Rivoli as you do it. It's sucking the shape of the bezel, sucking around the stone so that it follows it perfectly, so it becomes a perfectly circular bezel. So I've just found that I like the way that the bezels look better for pointed stones when I do them off loom first, off loom bead weaving, and then stitch them down onto the bead embroidery base. With a pointed stone, can you cut a little hole in the bezel? Yes, you could. You're gonna, depending on what you want to be mindful of what backing you're gonna put on there, because if there's a chance of that point of the stone cutting through the backing, it could scratch your phone if it is able to, over time wear through the backing that you end up putting on here. Like especially ultra suede is not as strong as leather. I would be worried about that. So yeah, that's one of the other problems that comes into play when you're trying to bezel a pointed stone on a flat bead embroidery base. What's the name of the glue you use to adhere the ultra suede to the backing? Crafter's glue. You've had Crafter's glue seep through the white ultra suede. Really? Wow. I've never heard of that happening, but I totally believe you. I'm assuming it has to do with the formulation of the glue. And I've never had a problem using this. I use a Jewel Bond for a lot of stuff. I use it for gluing stones down. It's non-toxic. It's sort of my alternative to E6000 because that bothers me. It gives me like a itching sensation, so I think I'm allergic to something in it. But Jewel Bond I use for gluing stones down and for gluing backing onto my beadwork. The other thing I use is Aleene's Jewel-It or Aleene's fabric glue. Fabric glue works well for this as well because you're basically gluing two pieces of fabric together. Even though you might be using leather on the back, this itself is like fabric. So I think those sorts of things are going to be better. The glues I use tend to be more tacky, so that may be why they're not seeping through. This is a very tacky glue, so similar to tacky glue, that brand of the glue. It's like white, it dries clear, and it doesn't. It's not liquidy enough to really seep through this, and I've never seen it seep through any of my Ultra Suede. So E6000 would definitely work, Dessa. I just personally like to avoid that one because of the young hands that are going to be handling this, and as well as my possible allergy to it. Have I tried Zap Glue? No, I've never tried that. Never even heard of that. I just kind of am using up what I have in the house already, which is a couple of these different craft glues, and then this one that I showed last week, this Gorilla Super Glue, which I actually bought to try to fix some broken plastic on my lawn tractor, and it sort of worked for that. But this one doesn't bother me, so I use this one to glue stones down sometimes, and it dries really fast. Alright, so I think that's where I'm going to end it for the week. So thank you again to everyone who's joined, and this has been the second part of the bead embroidery part of the Bead With Me bead embroidery smartphone case project. If you haven't seen the first two parts for this project, they are available on my YouTube channel, so just click over to my channel, click my little icon of my face to go to my channel and check those out. Next week we'll be doing the backing. Next week you should have the backing done if you want to follow along. Have your Ultra Suede or your leather already in place on what's going to be the inside of your phone case, and then we'll be working on the peyote stitched bezel that's going to actually hold the phone in place. Alright, so thanks again everybody. Have a good week, stay safe, and I'll see you online in between now and next Thursday, but I'll see you again here next Thursday, same time, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And yeah, bye!